So yesterday we learned some fantastic things, and what we learned is there's great technology coming out of Israel. We learned that they tend to go, when they grow, to globalize, first to the US before Europe. There was some kind of acknowledgement, yeah, sales and marketing isn't really the best thing we know, but I'd like to continue on this theme, especially as some of you, I mean, Saul, you're a long-time Israel investor. I think you have been involved in very successful stories like MyHeritage, Michael Eisenberg, Conduit, Wix, I mean, some great stories. Adam Valkin, you have done some amazing recent deals. I call you guys kind of the later stage Israel panel guys. And I think picking up on the theme from yesterday, how did your companies, and introduce yourself please, but how did your companies, after you introduced yourself, please touch upon, manage to get so nicely to scale? Maybe Saul, if you could start.
Thank you. So I'm Saul, I'm a partner at Index Ventures. And just in terms of Israel, actually, I think certainly Michael and definitely Adam were investing in Israel before me. I think Adam invested in Kenshu while he was at Arts Alliance, probably about 10 years ago. So I'm kind of a relative novice to Israel personally, although Index has been investing there for about 10 to 15 years. And as you said, I think, we've always been really excited by the quality of ideas that are coming out of Israel. What's really exciting to us now, and it's one of the reasons why I was really lucky to spend the last 2 years living in Israel, is that there's this cohort of companies, and you've mentioned some of them. I'd add companies like Outbrain and eToro and Payoneer and Panaya and many others to the list that are really sort of becoming scalable, standalone businesses doing tens, or in the case of Conduit, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, exceptional growth rates, profitability. So, I think there's no secret sauce to taking a company international. I think many of the challenges the Israeli companies face going international are similar to European companies. I think one of the things that has changed maybe in the last 5 years in Israel is both the level of ambition, both of the entrepreneurs and of the investors, and also the fact that there are genuinely international markets now that can cater to companies that are, doing tens and hundreds of millions of revenue. So I think as much as anything, partly it's sort of a cultural development, and then it's partly an issue of timing. We're just, all of us, fishing in a much more exciting pool when you're trying to build an international company than we were 5 years ago.
Okay. Thank you very much. Michael.
Yeah, Michael Eisenberg from Benchmark Capital. Pick up on what Saul said. I think we've kind of finally arrived at the golden age of the Israeli startup world, the Israeli venture world. It's been kind of 20 years in the making, much like Silicon Valley in the late 60s, early 70s. Was 20 years in the making, where you had a couple of standout companies, but by and large, there were middling companies. Israel took a little longer to get going, but because of the ability to scale globally through the web, mobile, which Israel's particularly strong in, and to Saul's point, the ambition of both the venture capitalists and the entrepreneurs, we've kind of arrived, and now you have the opportunity to build big world-beating companies out of Israel. I think there's one thing that's maybe self-serving for the three of us to say at this point, but the arrival of the international venture capitalists was a big driver in the rising of the ambition of local entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. There was a tendency in the market, and I think that's present in Europe to some level, to sell early rather than build big companies. It's a product of being in smaller markets. And now with the arrival of funds that have built big companies on a global scale, there's a lot more desire to, I think, make that happen.
So looking at your companies you are involved in, how many of them have open international offices?
Oh, all of them.
All of them?
Yeah, there's 7 million Israelis, doesn't make much of a market. So everyone opens an office in the first day. Most of them are, to your point, are in the US, but increasingly, which wasn't true even 5 years ago, most of them are headquartering in Israel. It used to be 5 years ago, you went out and got a CEO, head of marketing, whatever it was. in the US and in rare cases in Europe. Today, the CEO and senior management team is staying put in Israel and conquering the world from downtown Tel Aviv. I was just telling somebody yesterday, we have this investment in a company called Farmigo. And Farmigo is attempting to disrupt the whole US food system using the internet by providing internet software or platform to small and medium-sized farms. You can deliver fresh produce like you get fruit and veggie boxes here in the UK, trying to do this across the United States. They've already rolled out across 27 states in the United States, and all this from the port of Tel Aviv. So you can even disrupt the fresh food system from Tel Aviv these days.
So Adam, EBITDA in the Holy Land. Talk about it.
Yeah, so Adam Valkin from Accel Partners. I have been an active investor in Israel for about 7 or 8 years, and Accel has been active in Israel for a lot longer. Our European fund has made over 30 investments in Israel, deploying several $100 million, so very committed to opportunities there. A lot of our early investments were in communication and software, and over the last couple of years we've done a lot more internet stuff, companies like MyThings that you saw earlier, MyHeritage, where I work with Saul, Seeking Alpha, where I work with Michael, and more recently some investments that I led this year, a company called Fiverr, which presented yesterday, which is a marketplace for services, and Dragonplay, which is one of the largest mobile game developers based in Tel Aviv. And what's interesting just about some of the topics we've discussed is our two recent investments, Fiverr and Dragonplay, are both companies that set up in 2010, and by the time we invested in the first quarter of 2012, were both truly global phenomenon based out of Israel. So neither company has actually set up offices outside of Israel yet, although both, of course, will. But even though they haven't done that, they've become truly global businesses that sell in literally 200 countries. And I think that's just a really interesting development that, with the internet and with the rise of the app ecosystem and mobile, that you can have a company based in Tel Aviv, in the case of Dragonplay or Benjamina, in the case of Fiverr, that is literally servicing the whole world, millions of customers on a monthly basis from a small office in Tel Aviv. And I think it's also important that people never fully understood that Israel could be the source of global internet and mobile service application companies, and in the way that it has happened. And if you look at the mobile space, or the social gaming space, two of the most successful mobile game developers ever, social mobile game developers ever, in the history of the planet, Playtika and Dragonplay, both come from the same neighborhood, from the same block, literally, in Tel Aviv. And I think that should just be an indication about what's to come from Israel in the next phase of internet and mobile services.
See, Marco, there's a really important point here which shouldn't be lost on you, and that is that Tel Aviv is the only tech center in the world that's on the beach. So where else does an entrepreneur...
Well, Barcelona is also on the beach, and there's some great...
Not a tech center.
Don't tell LA.
It's maybe not as hot there. Saul, what do you tell Israeli entrepreneurs when they get, like birds want to flee the nest, they get this thing, I have to be now in the valley, and they say, is this the right time, Saul? When is the right time, and how do you manage them?
Well, look, I think, as both of the guys have said, the ability to actually scale global businesses from Israel is now a reality. I think there are definitely certain functions, particularly, and it depends on what sector you're in, business development, probably if it's sort of internet related, sort of sales, if you're sort of somewhat enterprise or ad tech related, that makes sense in New York or San Francisco. But one of the things I would say to any early stage company, again, Israeli or not, is that it's hard enough to manage an organization when you're on two different floors of the same building. You know, when you are managing an organization across, you know, a 9-hour time zone where there is no direct flight between Israel and San Francisco, you know, that is extremely challenging. It is not impossible, and it's imperative to have a presence on the West Coast. It's imperative to be selling on the East Coast. I think increasingly it's imperative to be looking at London. And then also, I think a lot of Israeli companies are probably leading edge in terms of looking to Asia.
So Asia is a topic?
Absolutely. But I think, you know, the key thing from any early stage company's perspective is, you know, certainly send the guy with the suitcase out, you know, knocking on doors, doing deals as early as you can, but actually to set up a physical location where you're moving core functions or core decision makers, families being the core decision maker. You know, I think that's a very, very challenging move until you've really established your business model to a certain point. And I think if you look at the companies some of the companies that we're talking about, if you look at Wix, you know, Avishai is here. If you look at Iron Source, Thomas here. If you look at the Conduit guys, Dragonplay. If you look at MyHeritage, all of the CEOs are currently still in Israel. Now, it doesn't mean that some of them may not, you know, move at some point to sort of put a front door on the business, like Martin Mikos did, you know, go to Silicon Valley. But at the end of the day, you can get to extraordinary scale while, you know, keeping the team together. And I think that is increasingly the case. And if I look at Outbrain, Yaron Galai, who's the CEO of Outbrain, you know, his last business was based in New York, Quigo, which he sold to AOL. It made sense for him, given that he was selling to publishers and advertisers, to remain in New York and to have the sort of the core product and operations of his business in Israel. But this was a deeply experienced guy at sort of multi-time zone communication. And I think that is really hard to do, even if you're a brilliant management team. You know, there's enough stress being a startup without stretching yourself beyond your limits, I think.
So mobility and using technology to collaborate, like what we also discussed in the previous panel. I have one other question, which is Israel unrelated, and maybe it has to do a little bit with the question, shall we move internationally, open offices? When you guys invest, and you're probably running some of the most famous venture capital, growth capital funds, when a company which reached break even and is then starting to generate cash flow has this famous question, should I take the surplus cash, invest in growth versus profits? I mean, not every company, every situation is created equal, but more and more we see across the universe VCs pushing the companies to reinvest cash. Maybe Adam, you can give your perspective of the companies you work with, how much cash they should reinvest, how does this impact the exit, when you should invest. I know it's a very open, complex question, but a lot of clients ask us, shall we keep the cash, show high EBITDA, or shall we show high revenue growth?
Yes, I think it's a very poignant question, and one that we think about a lot. And just, for example, some of the companies that I mentioned earlier, like Dragonplay, that are very cash generative, but also don't require a lot of cash to build, because they have high operating leverage and can be global without having lots of offices, and don't need sales teams and distribution teams in you know, all over the world, because it all kind of happens through, you know, Facebook or Android or the iOS App Store. You know, so we deal with this question with lots of companies, and I think, you know, what we find is a lot of our entrepreneurs are in situations where they have a lot of cash in the bank because of fundraising, because of profits, and are constantly grappling with the question of how fast to spend it. And you know, most good entrepreneurs hate to waste money, so a lot depends on what kind of return on investment they can get, either by building out the organization internationally or investing in marketing / customer acquisition. or other uses for the cash. But I think people are also aware that the future is uncertain. Who knows what the funding environment will be like down the road? So I don't have a problem with companies that want to take a more conservative approach with their cash. But I do like to encourage companies to be aggressive and to invest in marketing so long as they believe that the return is attractive.
Thank you. I think one more question. Of your portfolio companies, Israel businesses, anyone opened offices in Europe?
Sure. I mean, Outbrain has offices in London and is actively selling in most European markets. My heritage has now done 8 acquisitions, of which 3 or 4 were in Europe: Germany, Poland, the Netherlands, and the UK.
And they have, I think, an own private equity company, but de facto they are still like a company on its own, not a part of a big strategic, so they kind of stayed independent as such.
My heritage?
Yeah. I mean, they went public, of course, but that's a story where you can address very nicely against the prejudice Israeli companies are selling too early. No, they're actually buying 8 companies.
Yeah. No, I think, acquisitions is another use of capital.
I was going to say that, yeah. I think that the core question you need to ask about the cash, and maybe related exactly to what Saul's saying right now, is first of all, what do you want to do as an entrepreneur? Is this a growth business that you ultimately want to take public, or is this some sort of lifestyle business where you want to take the cash off the table? And that's a pretty fundamental question. If the answer is I want to take this company public, you need to invest that cash in continued growth, continued sustainable growth. That doesn't mean buy $1 of revenue for $2. That's a bad idea. That's a bad business model. But if you can invest that cash and get a reasonable return on it and long-term value, that makes a lot of sense. And then to Saul's point, acquisitions are a growth strategy today for what we call startups or later stage companies. It's cool that MyHeritage bought 8 companies and is trying to accelerate its growth that way. We bought Wibia at Conduit. Those guys are here. And there are other acquisitions one can do to kind of turbocharge their business. That's a pretty good use of cash.
I think every situation is different, and you probably evaluate with the companies and the kind of preferences of the entrepreneurs individually. Well, guys, thank you very much. Congratulations for the fantastic deals you have done. And good luck for the future. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks.